absolutely breathtaking scenes in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Terrifying, of course, because of gun laws in America, but also grimly predictable and, of course, predicted. I would remind you at this point in proceedings that I only have to put £10 in the tin when I say I told you so in the context of Brexit. I've made no such pledge in the context of Donald Trump, and indeed if I had, I'd now be facing bankruptcy, or at least I'd be running the risk of bankruptcy. But the idea that anybody could have been surprised by what this man has unleashed is, to my mind, deeply disingenuous. It's been obvious from the start that his flirtations with fascism would be consummated at the very first opportunity. And, of course, the first opportunity comes when he is no longer the elected president of America, but is somehow determined to cling on to office and to power. That is how the playbook unfolds at almost every comparable point in history. And the question of how it happened is perhaps not as complicated as it initially appears. I am going to ask you how you account for the culmination last night, how you account for each step upon the path to where America has ended up. But I don't know that there is much debate about where it began. It began with birtherism. It began with Donald Trump's decision to lie through his teeth about Barack Obama's birth. And it worked as a rhetorical device and a political tactic because of racism, because of white supremacism, or just base bigotry, however you prefer to term it. The idea that a man of color could be president of the United States of America struck some people so deeply that they were prepared to hold their nose, close their eyes, and go along with what were obvious lies. To qualify, there were some people, no doubt, who genuinely believed that there were question marks hanging over Barack Obama's birth, but you had to desire to believe it in order to get to the point where you believed it. You had to want it to be true. And if you wanted it to be true, it was because you saw his skin color as somehow delegitimizing his humanity and his right to be president of the United States of America. So when you start tracing back to its very origins, the uncorked fascism that was on the streets of America yesterday, you, I think, begin with the birtherism. You begin with the claim that this American is not an American because he's black. It really is, to me, as simple as that. As ever, when I think things are simple, the next thing I do is invite you to ring me and tell me why I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973 is, as ever, the number that you need. So the horrible bit now is, of course, the complicity in this, this goose-stepping towards what we saw last night. The complicity in it is something that almost everybody in the British media is guilty of. Whether it's Michael Gove interviewing Donald Trump without telling anyone that Rupert Murdoch was in the same room. This is all after the birtherism. Remember, the birtherism was the point at which civilized society should have shut the door on Donald Trump, locked it, and thrown away the key. If he was allowed to get away with that, for my money, and again, call me, put me straight, for my money, that was the breaking point, bizarrely. Long before he even announced his intention to run for president, the damage had been done, that the genie was out of the bottle, because that level of obvious, base, unapologetic racism, this man has no right to be president, he has no right to be American because he's black, is the seed from which all that followed did grow. I really do believe that, by the way. I'm not being facetious when I say give me a call and tell me why I'm wrong, but I am being completely sincere with you when I say that the birtherism is the source of all the evil that followed. And then you start looking at some of the other milestones on this path, on this march, and you think of maybe the Access Hollywood tape, which had nothing to do with racism and everything to do with another bigotry, the basest misogyny that you could imagine. People in this country and in our media and our political establishment queuing up to excuse his self-confessed sexual depravity as locker room talk. You remember? I don't even need to say the names, do I? I'll try perhaps to focus upon people who are in public life, in politics in this country, rather than in the media, but I may struggle to sustain that ambition. So Gove goes there. The front page of The Sun has Trump, I back Boris. Everywhere you turn, Jacob Rees-Mogg writing articles for The Telegraph about why a Trump victory would be great for the UK. Andrew Neil's Spectator magazine, practically a fanzine for Donald Trump at times, and publishing some of the most toxic and the most dishonest journalism that I have ever encountered in my life. But hey-ho, they'll still be back at work today. They'll be back on air tomorrow. Well-known television host who blocked me on Twitter last night after we'd had something of a bromance last year, because he was probably the most prominent British cheerleader for Donald Trump long after the birtherism. So look, 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? And it may well be that you were aware of Trump's depravity long before the rest of us were, or that you actually thought that the aspersions cast upon Barack Obama's birth were not as profound and as important as I now see them to be. But if you try to get a bead on how the hell this happened, you have to begin with the legitimizing of racism. You have to begin with all the people who complain about political correctness and who complain about wokeism and who complain about those of us who pursue equality, sometimes with a slightly aggressive demeanor, because all they've ever really wanted, whether they realize it or not, is a return to the days when it was okay to be publicly and horribly racist. And Donald Trump, along with his British equivalents, arrived on the political stage with that irresistible invitation. Half of a country will bite your arm off if you invite them to be publicly and freely racist once again. What do you think complaints about political correctness and cancel culture and wokeism are really about? They're complaints about people saying don't be racist. They're complaints about people saying if you are racist in public, you should probably get punished in some way, whether it involves losing your livelihood or whether it involves some other sort of sanction. It is reasonable to suggest that trying to dehumanize another person is an offence that should be punished. But they call that political correctness. They call that wokeism. It's not. It's just anti-racism. And the men who came forward in Britain and America over the last few years with a very seductive invitation to be racist once again, to blame your entire life on somebody else, well, they all bear responsibility for what happened in America yesterday. All of them. So how do you explain it? Possibly through the lens that I've just offered you, the lens of casting aspersions upon Barack Obama's birth, because somewhere deep in the bile ducts of men like Donald Trump, the idea that a black man can be president of their country is absolutely intolerable. Or you may have a different starting point or a different explanation or a different analysis. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And, of course, what do we do next? It might be too early to ask this question. What should happen publicly? The public sphere, the media, the fourth estate, the organizations and individuals that are supposed to speak truth to power and hold governments to account. What happens to all the people that waved through Donald Trump? What happens to all the people who waved their little flags? What about that invitation that was made to the people of this city, London, not too long ago, to choose between the British Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, or the American President of America, Donald Trump? And how many people actually elected to side with the uncorked racist against the democratically elected Mayor of London? These problems run deep. These problems run deep. And many of them have been created quite deliberately by people who are already trying to wash their hands of responsibility. I see you. I see you claiming it's all down to Donald Trump and nobody else. I see you signing the checks for people that have been cheerleading for him for years. I see you boasting about your friendship and now somehow claiming that it was all grimly predictable and we should have seen through him years ago. Well, here's the news, my dudes. We did. We saw through him years ago. We saw through him from day one. We knew exactly what he represented and exactly where it could lead. Unchallenged, base bigotry, legitimized racism, white supremacism passed off as both sides. We saw this, and I'm afraid that you don't get to wash your hands this time, because what we saw in America yesterday was not something we should celebrate. It was a very, very narrow escape. It was an incredibly close call. It was the moment where those who've been encouraged to flirt with fascism since Donald Trump was elected sought to consummate that relationship and mount an actual coup